Welcome back, everybody. Part 9 of Angels. We've been talking about angels. This time we're going to talk about who is the angel of the Lord. Interesting topic, one that's brought up a lot and some confusion around it, but we will hopefully clear up some of that confusion today. So let's go ahead and take a look at the text and we will jump right into it. Hope you're all doing well. Let's take a look at what we have for you. All right, the angel of the Lord. Interesting topic, as I mentioned. Some introductory information on it hopefully will be enlightening for you here, because I tell you, it's interesting, and it actually took a lot of. I didn't think this was going to take as much time to prepare for as it did, but did a lot of. And you have to get intricate on this because there's a lot of detail in it. But we're going to take a look at it. We'll go through a lot of verses and we'll look at the information as a whole. So some introductory stuff to start out with as we're talking about it. So the angel of the Lord appears frequently in the Old Testament, but it's interesting that it's put here conspicuously absent in the New Testament after the incarnation of Christ. It actually appears as an angel of the Lord instead of the angel of the Lord in the New Testament. So we'll talk about what that means and get into that a little deeper in a couple slides. Many conservative theological scholars, and I say many because the vast majority of them, I just didn't take a poll, right, to see how many did and how many didn't, equate the angel of the Lord with a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. You'll hear that referred to as a Christophany. So interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that and how do we know that, right? And as all things, when it comes to translating text, in translation, context is everything. The people who have translated our modern English versions that we have today, amazing scholars in the art of translation and their knowledge of ancient languages, both Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So very well done in terms of that. But again, context is everything. So we have to keep that in mind. And also don't forget that when people are translating texts, sometimes their theological premise, so what they believe theologically, will impact how they translate things as well. That can be appropriate, can be inappropriate at times. So let's keep going here, and we'll take a look. So more of the details. The angel of the Lord appears actually in 52 verses in the Old Testament. We'll go through a few of those, and the majority of them are in a certain amount of examples, which we'll see here in the next slide. And it occurs only 12 times in the New Testament. And again, it's as an angel of the Lord in the New Testament, not the angel of the Lord. So note the indefinite article there, and that's important to remember. And let's keep going. Notable Old Testament appearances. And, it's really interesting when you go back and look at the Old Testament stories and march through the narrative of those. It's fascinating. And the first encounter with the angel of the Lord is in Genesis 16. So when Hagar's in the wilderness, after Sarah kind of casts her out because of that whole ordeal, yeah, interesting story there also, right? Perhaps an episode for another day. Regardless, Hagar's in despair, and what she say, right? She encounters the angel of the Lord there. In Genesis 22, then, with Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac, most of us forget that it says the angel of the Lord is the one who came down and told him to stop, not to harm his son. So interesting narrative there as well. Then in Exodus 3, boy, here's another one too. Moses at the burning bush. I mean, a lot of people remember, the movie, The Ten Commandments, and forget that in the text, in Exodus itself, within the Bible, it says that the angel of the Lord appeared in the burning bush. So it's the angel of the Lord who is talking to Moses within that burning bush. Then, boy, there's an entertaining story in Numbers 22 with Balaam and the donkey. Remember, he's riding the donkey, and it says the angel of the Lord got in front of the donkey to stop it. And the donkey could see it, but Balaam couldn't see it. So it's quite an entertaining story there if you go look at it in Numbers 22. But again, it is the angel of the Lord that appears, that the donkey is able to see, and Balaam is not, until the angel of the Lord opens Balaam's eyes, and he finally is able to see it. And then in Judges 6, we have the call of Gideon. Again, it's the angel of the Lord who's involved in that. And also in Judges 13, the announcement of Samson's birth, again, is the angel of the Lord. So the majority of the appearances within the Old Testament are dealing with these, six narratives here. There's a few instances within the Psalms that it occurs, some other examples in Chronicles. A couple places, I believe in Second Kings. You can go search on Angel of the Lord on Blue Letter Bible or Bible Gateway or whatever Bible software you have, and you can get all the appearances of it. But the majority of the ones that aren't here are just mentioned briefly in a narrative. The angel of the Lord this, the angel of the Lord that. So you can go track them all down. And there's one that we do want to talk about in a little more specifics, which we'll get here in a couple slides. All right, so continuing on, notable New Testament appearances. So again, in the New Testament, we have an angel of the Lord, not the angel of the Lord. So important to remember the distinction there. We'll talk a little more about that. But in Matthew 1 and 2, it's the angel of the Lord that appears to Joseph in dreams. So Joseph is having his dreams. One is, not to make sure that he doesn't put Mary away. Another is, to rescue them from Egypt. But we'll get into a little more details, those I believe in the next slide. And then Luke 1. A lot of people forget that when remember Zechariah was in the Holy of Holies, it was his turn, and he was elected to go into the Holy of Holies for the sacrifice that year. And that's when he finds out about that, hey, he's going to have a son, the birth of John the Baptist. And that is the angel of the Lord that appears to him. So a lot of people forget that in the narrative. And appearing to the shepherds, announcing the birth of Christ. Again, it says the angel of the Lord. An angel of the Lord appearing to the shepherds, announcing the birth of Christ. Again, within the New Testament, sorry, I misspoke a little bit. It's always an angel of the Lord. And then in Matthew 28, an angel of the Lord rolls the stone away from Jesus's tomb and then it comes down, rolls the stone away and sits on top of it. So interesting narrative there. And it's funny how we forget this stuff. We remember an angel was there, but we don't remember the distinction that, hey, that in the New Testament here, it's saying an angel of the Lord was there. Several times throughout Acts, and Acts 5 opens the gates to the prison so people can't get out. Acts 8 sends Philip to the Ethiopian eunuch. If you remember that story, right, where Philip then is basically transported away from the Ethiopian eunuch after he tells him about Christ and baptizes him. But it's an angel of the Lord that sends Philip to the Ethiopian eunuch. And then Acts 12, an angel of the Lord breaks Peter out of jail. And also, an angel of the Lord strikes Herod dead. So quite a story there in Acts chapter 12, if you go reread that and check it out to refresh your memory with it. Again, an angel of the Lord. But then that's the last appearance we have is in Acts 12. So an angel of the Lord disappears from the rest of the New Testament, not encountered ever again, even within the book of Revelation. So fascinating from that perspective. That it just appears to no longer be around. So interesting there. Now, some more New Testament appearances. I want to get a little more specific back to Joseph in his dreams because it's worth taking a look at, okay? So back in Matthew 1:20, and the reason I call this out is you'll see here. So let's go ahead and read the text. But when he had considered this, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. For the child who has been conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so again, that's Matthew 1:20. But then we read in, and before really we go to Matthew 1:19, I wanted to remind you that then in Matthew 1:24, so let me go ahead and take that off, not to distract you. In Matthew 1:24, it says that that's at the end of his dream that he wakes up. So as he woke, it says that he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. So that's the only place in the New Testament where we have the angel of the Lord. But I think it's important to remember here, and you can even pull that up yourself in Matthew 1:24. It's not talking about the angel of the Lord as in a title. Okay, the title is here in Matthew 1:20 with an angel of the Lord. But Matthew 1:24, he's saying that the angel of the Lord that he saw. Okay, so he's referring to that specific one that he saw, that he went and did as that angel had commanded him. So again, Matthew 1:24 is the only appearance of the angel of the Lord within the New Testament. But even the conservative scholars out there are saying, yeah, it's not the angel of the Lord as in a title, but referring back to an angel of the Lord, which appeared to him in Matthew 1:20. Okay, so enough out of the way. But then you get to Matthew 2:19 through 20. And again, we have it, right? So we forget that, hey, this angel that was appearing to him was an angel of the Lord. So let's read this real quick. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and go into the land of Israel. for those who sought the child's life are dead. So again, the key point there, right? Back in verse 19, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph again in a dream. So interesting how an angel of the Lord is very active in the story of Christ's birth, both him in his birth story, appearing to the shepherds, then also active as to Joseph in a dream to not put Mary away, and then also again in a dream to tell him, hey, it's okay now to go back to leave out of Israel and go back into the land. I'm sorry, to leave out of Egypt and go back into the land of Israel. Okay, let's talk about grammar a minute, right? It's important because we've been talking, is there a distinction between the angel of the Lord and an angel of the Lord? What's the difference, right? So let's talk about grammar real quick. And it's interesting too if you watch any of Michael Heiser's stuff, and he's all over YouTube. He's passed away now. Unfortunately, I believe he passed away of pancreatic cancer a couple years ago. Fantastic Old Testament scholar. Speaks a lot on the spirit world, on angels, and all of that. So I really, if you're looking for a deep dive, boy, go to YouTube and type in Michael Heiser. And in fact, I'll put a link to the intro, one of his intro sessions on the subject in the comments or in the description below, so you have that. But just a great Old Testament scholar, really digs into it. But I think of him because as we're talking about grammar, he says, he'll use the phrase at times, sorry for the grammar spasm, because again, he's this Old Testament scholar, very bright gentleman, very versed in all the nuances of the Old Testament text. But anyway, so the angel of the Lord uses the definite article, the or the, whichever you prefer to call it. An angel of the Lord uses the indefinite article, a or an. Okay, so we've got the indefinite article versus the definite article. Okay, so if I were to say, hand me the pencil, it would be very specific pencil, versus hand me a pencil, it could be any pencil. Okay, so maybe if I'm saying hand me the pencil, I may be pointing to one. Now you could argue you could get more descriptive, like hand me the pencil over there, whatever, regardless. This gives you just a basic sentence in how to distinguish the use of the definite article versus the indefinite article. Here's the challenge. Neither Greek nor Hebrew has an indefinite article. So you go, well, boy, how do you know the difference, right? So, and I tell you, I've had 2 years of Greek, which, of course, nowhere near what Michael Heiser's had. But regardless, you're pretty deep into it. If you don't have a definite article present, you can imply the indefinite article, but not all the time. There's no fixed rule that says that, okay? You can imply it, but you don't have to all the time. So how do you know? Again, context drives your decision. So context is king in this type of stuff, and here's just one example of how it is. And I only bring this up and spend a few minutes on it because we're talking about the difference between the angel of the Lord as a title, very specific title in the Old Testament, versus an angel of the Lord in the New Testament. So it's interesting how those distinctions have been made. Okay, so let's talk about the angel of the Lord and as a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And you're going, wow, if you've never encountered that concept before, it occurs throughout the Old Testament. Quite a few pre-incarnate appearances of Christ, and the majority of the time you will see it as the angel of the Lord. So there's overwhelming evidence of the language it's used, and again, looking at the context, because the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament identifies himself almost all the time in some way as God. So a few of those examples in Genesis 16 there, back to Hagar again. The angel of the Lord told Hagar that he will multiply her descendants. And Hagar calls him, says of him, that you are the God who sees. You wouldn't say that to just a normal angel, right? I mean, in fact, angels refused to be worshipped, and we'll talk about that here in a couple verses. Back to Genesis 22 with Abraham and Isaac. Again, so the angel of the Lord says to Isaac to Abraham when he tells him not to kill his son, he said, "You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Okay, suggesting that he, and this is the angel of the Lord talking, suggesting he is the one to whom the sacrifice was being offered, because God said, "Go sacrifice your son to me." And therefore, the angel of the Lord is saying, "You did not withhold your son from me." So again, the context, the angel of the Lord is claiming deity. Well, how could they, an angel would not do that. And keep in mind that the word angel, both in the Hebrew and in the Greek, means messenger. Okay, so let's don't forget that. And the burning bush again, The angel of the Lord appears to Moses in the burning bush, but notice that the text equates him with God. He tells him to remove your shoes, you're on holy ground. And if we compare that to John 8:58, where Jesus is reminding some of the people that, hey, don't forget, before Abraham was, I am. That's one of the key verses in the New Testament where Jesus equates himself with God. There you go. I mean, referring back to the burning bush, again, the I am that I am. Tell the people when they ask my name that I am sent you. So again, equating the angel of the Lord, equating himself with God. A few more examples. In Exodus 23, again, so if you remember right too, that out in the wilderness, they had an angel that went before them. So the angel that goes before the nation of Israel, God tells Israel to obey his voice, do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. So this is applying a unique representation of God's essence. So again, the angel of the Lord is going before them, and he's saying, do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions. How many angels do you know out there? Is it ever mentioned of that are able to pardon people's transgressions? I can help you out there. Normal angels, zero. God himself, especially the Son of God, Christ himself, intercedes for us for the forgiveness of our sins. Absolutely. So as you start to take this into the whole picture, it gets a unique representation, and you see even more fully both in both the New Testament in an obvious way, and then the Old Testament in a more concealed way, how Christ himself is the atonement for our sins. In Judges 6, Gideon offers a sacrifice to the angel of the Lord. So a sacrifice to the angel of the Lord, and the angel of the Lord accepts it. So again, this act implies deity, because if you remember, if you go to Revelation 19 and in 22, and I have the references there for you, you can go take it out, check it out, take a look at it. John basically wants to fall down before the angel who's showing him all this stuff, and the angel each time reacts, do not do it. Worship God, do not worship me. So angels do not permit themselves to be treated as deity or remotely even acted towards as deity, to the point where they won't allow someone to bow down before them. As soon as John started to do that in the book of Revelation, immediately the angel was like, do not do it. I'm a servant of God just like you. Worship God. So a very, very key point there that, hey, the angel of the Lord is definitely something very unique and equated with God. This is interesting. So the Targums, and those are actually in Aramaic paraphrases of the Hebrew Bible. You could look at them as Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible, and they were created back sometime around the time of the Babylonian exile. But during that time, the Hebrew language started to phase out, right? So they needed, since people were speaking the common tongue, Aramaic, they needed a translation in their own text. Just like today, we have the English Bible. For those of us who are English speakers, if you're speakers of other language, you probably have one in your own language as well. It's in the majority of the major languages around the world. So you're going to have a translation in the language that you're comfortable with, because if we had the Hebrew Bible, that's all we had for the Old Testament, we would be struggling very hard to be able to read that. Just like the New Testament, if all we had was it in Greek, we have it in English translation. So that's the same here, but I only bring this up because it's interesting. It shows some of the tradition around this as well, is that the scholars at the time when they made these translations, they equated the angel of the Lord as the word of the Lord. Isn't that an interesting translation in the Old Testament? So again, this is before New Testament times, but they equated it as the word of the Lord. Now compare that to John 1:1. In beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So that's quite an interesting dynamic, that they equated the angel of the Lord as the Word of the Lord. All right. Challenging verses. It's worth bringing up. We should, right? Because there's one in particular that some people will have an issue with, and there's a few verses here, section in 2 Samuel 24, 15 through 17. It's an interesting. Boy, I tell you, there's interesting stories in the Old Testament, isn't there? If you were to go to 2 Samuel and read the whole 24th chapter, it would give you some context. But David was basically going to have a census, number the people. He had not been told by God to create a census. So in other places within the Old Testament, he was told to go out and do a census. Here he was not. So he did it, and it appears, if you look at the parallel verses, I believe it's in Second Chronicles. Boy, it's eluding me at the moment. Um, so a different account of it, it talks about how Satan influenced him to go number the people. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the sin here was. And at the beginning of this, is before we get to verses 15, it's interesting because God appeared to the prophet Gad and told him to say to David, hey, you've got a choice. You've sinned and you've got a choice, right? You can choose one of three things. You can choose 7 years of famine. You can choose 3 months of fleeing your foes, or you can choose 3 days of pestilence. Which would you like? So it's like, I mean, look at this story, right? It's like, wow. I mean, the sin is horrific, and whatever he did, God, it says that the anger of the Lord burned against them again. And so he gives David a choice of which one do you want. It's interesting too that David doesn't answer him other than he doesn't pick one. He just says that, hey, I don't want to fall before men. So the Lord chooses pestilence. And you see here in verse 15, let's just take a look at it, starting in verse 15. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning until the appointed time, and 70,000 men of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people, "It is enough. Now relax your hand." And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah, and Araunah the Jebusite. Then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel who was striking down the people and said, "Behold, it is I who have sinned, and it is I who have done wrong. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand be against me and against my father's house." So why do I bring this up? Because we have Daniel talking to the Lord, and in our English translation, we, at least in New American Standard here, we have the Lord. Most will say the Lord here. New American Standard 95 edition, I believe the new version says something different, and I'll tell you that here in a second. But then we also have the angel of the Lord. So if Daniel is talking to the Lord, but then we have the angel of the Lord, could he be talking to Christ, but yet also be referring to it as the angel of the Lord, who is also pre-incarnate vision of Christ? It seems to not make a lot of sense, does it? But if you look at this, the angel of the Lord here, and if we were to go up in verse 16, when the angel stretched out his hand towards Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord relented from the calamity and said to the angel who destroyed the people. Let's talk about the word there, the Lord. The Lord there, the word for that is actually Yahweh. So in the New American Standard, I know they will put Lord in the Old Testament in all caps, but yet lower, kind of smaller word, all caps, when it represents Yahweh. So again, Yahweh, the Yahweh Vavhe, the unspeakable name of God that they didn't. So we're talking about God here, as opposed to Christ incarnate. So the angel of the Lord here could also be pre-incarnate Christ, because the word for Lord here should be Yahweh, and it is Yahweh in the Hebrew. So scholars debate on this section on exactly, who's talking, what's going on. Is this angel of the Lord really the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Christ, again going out and doing destruction, or is it not? I'm on the fence on this one. Not really sure. I would argue it doesn't necessarily matter. It doesn't take away from the other examples that quite clearly indicate that, hey, that the angel of the Lord is being worshipped. Notice here, we don't see any worship really either, it appears, of the angel of the Lord. So we don't have that context either to kind of help us through this verse. That gives you an idea, again, of how context is so important when we look at these different examples. But you saw from the previous ones that we had that the vast majority of them definitely appear to be deity related. Therefore, our conclusion is, I would say, in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord must be the pre-incarnate appearance of Christ in most places. Okay, so again, I showed you one where maybe it's not. But again, something interesting to look at. Oh, by the way, you could go look at Zechariah 1 and I believe Zechariah 3 as well. Very interesting sections of scripture. There's another section where maybe when it talks about the angel of the Lord there, it may not be a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. I tend towards more that it is in the Zechariah section, but the conversation back and forth is a little confusing. If you'll go read it, you'll see what I'm talking about as well. In the New Testament, boy, the New Testament's got to be a special angel due to the fact of Christ's incarnation has occurred. So no way in the New Testament is the angel of the Lord, which is referred to as an angel of the Lord, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, because Christ has already appeared. His incarnation has occurred. He's appeared as the God-man here, and in which, of course, disappears from the rest of the New Testament until you get to Acts, where then we have an angel of the Lord appears a few times as well. But Christ has already been resurrected, gone back seated with the Father, so we know that it's definitely not him at that point. So a lot of information in there. I know it's a lot. If you haven't dealt with the subject before, go check it out. Go look up all these references yourself, because I tell you, it's amazing really what is out there. And as you start to dig into this text and go through each one of those examples, I'm like, hey, like I said as well, go out to Blue Letter Bible, go out to Bible Gateway, open whatever Bible study software program you may have, and type in Angel of the Lord throughout, both Old Testament and New Testament. Go look at each example and then make a decision for yourself. But it's fascinating to see. So I hope you enjoyed this study. I hope you have a great week. And I tell you, we will see you next time. But take care, everyone. Have a God-honoring week. And we'll see you next time. Bye now.